Hello and welcome to the Bothering Strangers podcast with Max Hearing. I'm Max Hearing, and my guest today is Olympic and professional track athlete Natasha Hastings. She was a gold medalist in the 2008 Olympics on the 4x400 relay team, and also almost medaled in the 2016 Olympics, and is still a track athlete. Natasha, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for coming on. You've been running for a while,
Forever.
your whole life, obviously your whole life. But I guess like we spoke about. I mean, now that you're on the back end of your career, like, when you look back to like when you were in college, 05, 06, 07, has your training changed a lot?
Um, Definitely. And I love that question as I sit here in Columbia on campus looking over to the track stadium and the football stadium in the background here. But yeah, the first or biggest change for me from collegiate to professional was, as a collegiate, we had a ton of track meets during the track season, ran just about every weekend. So we trained hard, but we raced harder. And so by that, I was kind of able to race myself into shape. Race sharpness is one of the kind of the track jargon, if you will, which still exists as a pro. However, we don't have as many racing opportunities as we do in college. So we kind of had to switch that over a bit to, training a little bit more to replace those competitive opportunities that we had, to kind of get into race sharpness, if you will.
Race sharpness is actually never a term I've heard before.
You've never heard that before, you said?
I don't know me. I don't know any track athletes, so don't put it past me. But when you say race sharpness, does that refer to just kind of like the mental state where you're like ready to race?
It's the mental state is always a part of the game, but it's more so, I guess, if you will, finding your rhythm. Sorry, I've messaged my mom to tell her I'm doing a Zoom interview and she's texting me. Anyway,
tell her you're very important. Say, I'm very important, Mom. Not now.
Sorry about that. But it's more so about like finding your race rhythm and like getting into that rhythm throughout the season, and sort of that progression, if you will, of like, you're starting at point A, there's the end goal, there's the progression as you train to peak, and you want to perform well, and you're hoping to peak at the right time. So that's kind of more of what I mean by race sharpness, in that it kind of takes a little while for things to start clicking and you start racing at the level that you hope to race towards the end of the season.
So that was not in my head. It was not what it is. So
I'm curious to hear what you thought it was.
I really just thought it was kind of like the mental side of racing, like I was thinking mentally sharp in my head. That was just kind of what.
That's a thing too. That is a thing too, because I mean, if I'm honest, the first track meet of the season, no matter what, as long as I've been running, is the one that I get the most nervous about. And then after that, it's like once I get that first one out of the way, it's like, okay, here we go, let's roll. So that is a part of it too, kind of getting your mind back into that competitive state, and how your mind goes through that process every time you step on the track.
Okay, so I wasn't completely wrong. Good, glad. So I guess so you competed in the 2008 Olympics, won a gold medal. You competed in the 4x400 event.
Mm-hmm.
And then you compete in 2016, and you're still running.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look back at your professional career, like you said yourself that there are just less races after college.
Mm-hmm.
How has it changed from when you were 23, 22, 23, 24 to now? I don't mean to put you on blast, but in your mid 30s though.
Why putting me on blast?
I never know how people are going to respond to age. I'm just never aware of it. And I had a job interview a couple months ago, well, part-time job, and the guy was like probably 60, I don't know, and I called him middle-aged and he wasn't offended, but I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to say this, but like middle-aged.
Yeah.
And he was like
I mean,
and he's like a little older.
oh no. I embrace that I am seasoned. It's one of the things that I celebrate. I do also want to mention I did place fourth in the Open 400 in 2016, but I also did win another gold medal on the relay there as well. And so much has changed between my 20s and my 30s. The first thing that I will say in terms of just the opportunities again to compete is dwindling. Add COVID into the equation, that made it 10 times more difficult. But the sport of track and field has been one that's been plagued by finances as well as marketing, collectivism, the athletes joining together and, doing what would work collectively for us all. So I will say in the beginning of my career, there were more opportunities to make money and live off of the sport, whereas now opportunities not so much competitively and even by way of sponsorship. I mean, it's tough to get sponsorships, and as we move into or not even move into, we're well into the social media era. You're starting to see where social media presence sometimes is more valuable than performance, which is a discrepancy for many. So there are all kinds of things that have changed on the track, but the business of it and the earning potential for sure is one that I've seen over the years just take a turn for the worse, honestly.
So we'll circle back to the training thing then, but at this very moment, I guess I want to say like my last guest was an Olympic female rugby player, and we were talking about how both men and women's rugby could work in the United States, but for some reason just has been marketed. So is social media is one thing to talk about. I think where a lot of athletes are now getting a lot of attention. They're not even that good in their sport, but they've figured out a niche, in their thing. But especially with like TikTok now, is it a marketing issue? Because like I've been a sports my whole life. I'm gonna say I really only watch track at the Olympics.
At the Olympics, it's the every 4-year sport, which is mind blowing for a number of reasons. We are the number one team in the world.
Yes.
And even when you consider the every 4-year deal where you put us up against the other sports that are competing, great.
They didn't know you were doing the Zoom interview. They didn't know that the Bothering Strangers podcast need this time.
Oh God, I'm so sorry. But when you put us up against the other teams that are also competing in the Olympic Games, the bulk, and I could be wrong, but the bulk of medals come from track and field. So it's not that, a lack of performance, if you will. As an American athlete, if I've walked down the streets in London and Brussels and people recognize me. Here in the States, I appreciate the privacy. I do. But nobody knows what the heck I do. Even when I'm asked, what do you do? I'm kind of like, I don't really feel like having this conversation right now. So, I lived in Texas for 10 years. So people were like, why are you here? And I'm like, I work. And they're like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm in the athletic business. And I just try to leave it at that, because to go down the whole gamut of like how I make a living, what I do, it's tough. But the truth of the matter is, again, we're the number one sport, the number one team in the world. So that makes no sense in itself. But we're also the number one participatory sport in high school in the USA, even above football.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that things like football, baseball, basketball does that we lack is the grassroots marketing. Because there's you can't explain to me how we're the number one participatory sport in the world. Everybody's either competed in it or their kid has, or, but they don't know Olympians or world champions, or, that the sport exists in between every 4 years. And I think a lot of it has to do with like really reaching back to that grassroots and making that connection. And for whatever reason, it's been lost. And I don't think that it's impossible, because then, Jackie Joyner Kersee, Bruce Jenner, Gail Devers, Michael Johnson, those wouldn't be household names if it was impossible, right? So there's something that is amiss in the marketing for sure.
It's absolutely not impossible. Do you think, I mean, you're talking about men and women's track and field here, but would you say are men's in a slightly better position, or is it very similar?
Always.
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 I figured.
There's no way around that. There's even, we can even get into the colorism, racism conversation as well. Of
in track and field?
Absolutely.
I have not heard that one before.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Can we quickly get into the colorism conversation?
I mean, when you just look at, and again, some of it is the social media world that we're living in, but and I don't shy away from, I've benefited from it myself, in that, most of my medals, or the majority of my medals, are relay medals, even though I have in the teens number of medals. But I get publicity, notoriety, because I've, number one, invested in it. You reached out to my publicist for this interview. But I'm a pretty woman that does track and field, and I'm a light-skinned woman, and that's something that's celebrated. I don't shy away from the privilege that I've been afforded, but I acknowledge it, and I think that that's when the privilege becomes dangerous. And there are other women in the sport that we can say have benefited from such, and it's not that person's fault. It just is what it is. I've seen where, especially in the world of sprinting, if we're honest, African Americans dominate that sport,
without a doubt, not even close.
But when there's a white athlete that creeps into those events, all of a sudden they get all of the press and all of the notoriety. It just is what it is, and they don't
happens in all of the sports too.
Right. So it exists. And again, it's one of those things that I think, and I know to be true, that as long as we try to act like it doesn't exist and try to ignore it, that's where it becomes dangerous, and that's where we can't correct. But the truth of the matter is that it exists and it is, it's the truth.
Whew, man, this is a new one for me here. Well, the white thing, I mean, we've seen that across the board. I think basketball, for example, like right now, I don't say slight him, but like Alex Caruso on the Chicago Bulls. I love him. So I'm not saying this to talk point of anything. He's a great player. I think so much of his fame comes from being, and I think a lot of people agree with this, especially his initial fame came from being a very normal looking white guy, tall, but like very regular looking.
Yeah. Yeah. And two things can exist at one, right? You can be a great basketball player, and you are, but you can also get a little bit more notoriety because you are a normal looking white person. And so when I say this, it's not to take away from any of the talent that these people have, but it's just, taking a step back and looking at the broader picture for what it is.
Do you think that it is because, I mean, specifically in regards to white athletes, I do want to talk about the light skin thing as well, but in regards to white athletes, it comes down to, we live in a majority white country. And I mean, that's just numbers. If you talk about influence, money, it goes even farther, but just pure numbers, we live in a majority white country. And on some level, you want to see people that look like you in things. So of course, that's not an issue in terms of money, Hollywood, but basketball, football, track and field, I'm sure there are others I can't think of, are Black majority sports.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, again, I think two things can exist at once, right? And I think that there is something to be said for what you're saying, where it's basically our message, or what we try to get out there, that you have to see it to believe it. We want to see people that look like us so that we can believe that, we can do those things, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that's true. It's a fact that cannot be ignored. We are, although the majority of these sports, the minority in this country. And so the numbers are going to reflect differently because of those two facts, right? But then it still is a slap in the face as the majority of those sports to then see the minority still be the face of, because we live in, but the thing about it that's more of a slap in the face is that, when we're out winning whatever medals, winning whatever championships, blah, 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 you're backing us. And then when we use our platform to speak out on things that are important to us, then it's like, shut up and dribble, shut up and run. You shouldn't have an opinion. That's where it's like, no, this is not okay. Like, again, to me, I believe sport is a privilege. And now I've been given this platform as a privilege. So I'm going to use my platform to speak out to the things that are important to me. So I think that intersectionality of all of that they're all facts, but they're things that still have to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's also like we're in this weird kind of area where like athletes are now kind of figuring out how empowered they can be, especially like high profile athletes in high profile sports. And the media is not so sure how to respond to it.
Well, and I think some of that too is on top of us figuring out our power and being empowered to use our voice. I always talk about, I have my non-for-profit, the Natasha Hastings Foundation, where I work with women, or young girls rather. And one of the things that I tell them is that what makes the difference also is us being in positions to tell our stories and make decisions.
There has been just noises just running through wherever you are on campus, but you got it all over there.
It's popping over here. But by that, I always use the example of, women in sports, most of the time in track and swimming, volleyball, we're in these skimpy outfits, right? And reason, whoever designed it, now we've all normalized it, we're competing in it, it is what it is, right? But then when you look at how we're portrayed on the television screen, I can't tell you how many times I've looked at the cameraman and the cameraman been a woman. It's always a man that's depicting how I look on the TV screen, So when an awkward camera angle comes out that it's like, man, really, you had to show her butt like that, or you had to show, it's a man behind the camera.
Yeah.
I'm doing this interview with a white man.
A Jewish man, excuse you, a Jewish man. Give me some credit here, please.
But it's so important that we now also recognize that we have the power to not only speak and use our platform, but to also fill these spaces to help tell the stories and elevate the stories. I love telling the story about when I got pregnant, I was afraid to tell my sponsor. What made the difference in me having to make that phone call was that I made the phone call to two women, So I think that, and two white women, I'll throw that out there too.
They're going to be white sometimes.
But I think that, there's something that speaks to when we're in these positions that tell the stories, that make the decisions, we can move the needle further along. So I think we're starting to see now more than ever that we don't just have to be the athletes. We can be valuable as the journalist. We can be valuable, as the person in the front office making these decisions. We can be valuable in these other spaces that can create change.
It's basically, you're saying it's a literal whole team effort.
Literally. But I think too, I heard a speech a few years ago by David Banner, of all people. And what he said was kind of controversial, but I got the message in what he was saying. And what he said was, racism is often touted as this terrible thing, and racism actually isn't a bad thing. When you insert supremacy into racism, that's when it becomes dangerous. And he said, he broke it down where, Asians should support Asians. Asians should support like-minded people, liked people, not like-minded people. Jewish people support Jewish people.
We do.
We as Black people need to learn how to support Black people. So nobody's wrong for supporting their own, right? So again, there's nothing wrong with us creating spaces that are supportive of our own. It's when we start to inject those things with ideas of supremacy that it becomes dangerous. And I left with that, and I was like, he's on to something with that it's okay to be pro-Black, so long as I'm not pro-Black to the point where I want to cause harm to other groups. So
it's fine. It's a fine line.
Yeah, very fine. But I think you got to be clear about, what that I'm pro-woman. I'm pro-woman I also have a young son. I'm pro him, but I'm also pro-woman.
I think that a lot of people use the term pro this, pro that, and inherently like, well, that means you're anti.
You're anti, exactly.
Often not the case.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, we only have a couple minutes left, so the training thing honestly just seems unimportant now. since we just covered the actual important topics of track and field. But I mean, let's talk about Sydney McLaughlin real quick.
Mm-hmm.
The best, she's the best runner in her thing, but like she's possibly the best runner in the world.
World's greatest ever.
Okay, there you go. So I'm just like, what is she? But like you said, colorism.
Mm-hmm.
She's like very attractive. Has like a lot of model features because she's very tall too, I find, and she's light skinned.
Yeah.
How does that benefit or hurt her? Like when you look at
I think Sydney is a prime example for a number of reasons. Number one, all of those things that you just listed, but she is someone that's obviously not resting on those things. She's a world record holder. She did it at the trials. She did it again at the Olympic Games. I love to tell this part. Her world record going over hurdles equaled my season's best running the flat 400. Like
levels here,
levels. But what I think is incredibly unfortunate, we can see things happen on two extremes, right? Where those things were picked apart to a level that it negatively affected her in that, she felt bad. Like she can't help that she's a light-skinned, gorgeous woman that also runs very fast.
Very fast.
And she got hate, backlash, whatever you want to call it, for those reasons. And I mean, I'll be totally honest, Dalilah Muhammad was the one that I was going for. And that being because she's from New York, she was the reigning world record holder. Like I just had my reasons for like why I was like, Dalilah. But it didn't take away from how awesome that performance was. It wasn't a reason for me to go after Sydney for being who she can't help to be, for being herself. And so I think she's a prime example of how these things can be of negative impact and be dangerous when someone's just out here just trying to be the best them. And I mean, she showed us that she can be all of those things and still be effing great. Because that race, as I'm thinking about it, my pores are raising. It was just phenomenal.
God. What just the battle, right? The battle between Dalilah Muhammad, as you said, and Sydney.
Yeah, and 2021 was the year of the woman. In track and field, at least. Like,
yes. The
guys were out there performing, but the women were making history, and it was so cool to. I wished I could be a part of it, but it was so cool to watch, and it was especially cool to watch the women. I mean, to even see Sydney and Dalilah, like that's a rivalry that, if we go historically of how women are pitted against each other, and it was like, we're just two awesome women that respect one another. And we know how hard the other one works. And, both of them pulled the other to new PBs. Like, hats off to both of them.
Oh yeah, I mean, just there doesn't seem to be animosity there at all. Just kind of this, we're gonna make sure better. I was also just gonna say about Sydney. What's interesting about her too is that like she also seems very she seems pro-America. Through certain comments she made to the press, and it's like it doesn't. No one cared. Like I was like, oh, she mentioned, because normally you don't hear people mentioning that thing because they're like, I'm here to compete. It's different headspace. We heard it, and it's just like she's in this space where she's so good, and she looks to her where everyone's like, yeah, I don't care.
Wait, when you say she's pro-American,
she made a comment after the first heat about, and I just remember this one specifically, just about how she's like something about pressure, and she's like, oh, pressure is not really, yeah, and then it was like, but I really just came here to represent my country.
I think that's something that I think a lot of us, but especially anyone who has been a part of Team USA can relate to. I think the first time I got a Team USA uniform was when I was like 16. That was my first, it was a junior team. But anyway, there is something about putting those colors on. You do literally feel like a superhero. And I think, especially now in Black Lives Matter and like just bringing a lot of things to the forefront, people are, how can you be pro-America as a Black person? And I think you said something earlier too that is true. Like, I can be pro something without
and pro something else.
Right. And so to that, I love my country. I do. But in loving my country, I can still hold my country accountable.
And you should.
And that's actually like a show of love too, and we're in this cancel culture where if you say anything that is unpopular or against or you don't agree with, it's like you're automatically anti. And it's like, no, I love my country. I just want my country to do better. As I go out here to represent this country, as I wear these colors on my back, the best honor in our sport is to stand on the podium and hear our national anthem. I'd like for the national anthem to also be representative of me. If I'm out here representing this country, I'd like for the national anthem not to be offensive to me and my people. I don't think there's nothing wrong with that, but I think we're all pro-American. We just all want to see America do better.
And being pro-America and loving America, like, means different things to different people. And
different people.
Yeah, and then you throw the right-wing media, the left-wing media, like they portray it completely differently. Yep. And then and of course they're sensationalizing it, but it's a different thing. But we can talk about another time. I would like to have you another time. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
I ask this for every guest, so know that. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received, and what is the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
The best advice came from Michael Johnson when he was my agent. He was my first agent out of college, and he told me every day is an opportunity for you to get a leg up on your competitors. So with that, there are mornings that I wake up and I'm like, I don't feel like doing this. And it makes me think my competitor is probably doing it. So you need to get up and do it. So, you end up taking the mundane things and making them competitive, and, you're able to push through for that. The worst advice?
It's an odd question.
It is an odd question because if it was bad, I probably just threw it away anyway.
That's a healthy mindset, I suppose.
The worst advice. Probably to say yes to everything.
Ooh, that is bad advice. That's really, really poor advice.
Yeah, because in saying yes to everything, you lessen your value and your worth.
Really well put. Say, great way to end it right there. Because that's like these pieces of advice. They resonate with me a lot too. So maybe I'm just doing it for myself. Hard to say. Would love to have you on again to kind of discuss much farther, because I feel like we just scratched the surface on colorism, racism, all that stuff. There's a lot more to dig on. So in the future, definitely have you on again. Where can we find you?
I am on the socials, Natasha Hastings on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I also have a podcast / talk show that I do with my counterpart, Corey Carter, called Track Girl Summer. We're on all the socials, Instagram, Twitter, but our show is on YouTube. So subscribe to YouTube. And yeah.
Okay, so just Natasha Hastings. Okay, that's it. At Natasha Hastings, anywhere you look. Natasha, thank you so much for coming on. I mean this. I learned so much.
Well, thank you.
Hope I asked okay questions.
You did. They were great questions. I love an interview that's not the typical, so how's training going? And I know we kind of took a turn for somewhere, but I like when we take a turn and it goes to new levels.
I think it's one of the lessons I've learned in my short time podcasting is just like let it go where it goes, and just kind of stay active, stay with active listening, and that's all you need. I mean that's mainly what you need. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my guest Natasha Hastings. You can catch this on all the platforms, YouTube as well for video, and everyone stay safe.